We've seen Ukraine's no-surrender attitude on display, what with daring drone raids deep inside of Russian territory last weekend, and a new attack on the Kerch Strait bridge that links Moscow-occupied Crimea to the mainland. Spectacular shows, but can outgunned and outnumbered Kyiv keep it up, particularly with the U.S. Defense Secretary perhaps sending a signal, skipping a meeting of the NATO support group on Ukraine in Brussels. The U.S., which for now still shares intelligence and disperses military aid allotted to Kyiv by the previous administration. But for how much longer? We'll ask ahead of the NATO summit later this month in the Netherlands and ahead of Thursday's Oval Office initiation for new German Chancellor Friedrich Merz. What will the likes of Germany and France do if Trump loses interest entirely in Europe's defense and in the fate of Ukraine? Today in the France 24 debate, we're looking at the U.S. and the future of NATO. With us from Brussels, France 24 correspondent Dave Keating. How are things?
Good evening, Francois.
Former German ambassador to NATO, Joachim Bitterlich, is with us. Good to see you.
Pleasure.
And good to see former French ambassador to Russia, Claude Blanche-Maison. Your memoirs are published in French, fragments of an adventurous parcours, an adventurous path, shall we say?
Exactly.
Right? Yes. Thanks for joining us here. From Cambridge, Massachusetts, Mariana Bujarin, Senior Research Associate at Harvard University's Kennedy School's Belfer Center for International Affairs. I see that Harvard's been in the news of late. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for inviting me.
You can always listen, that's right, listen to the show wherever podcasts are streamed. He will be a late arrival in Brussels. Pete Hegseth missing Wednesday's meeting of the Ukraine Defense Contact Group at the Alliance headquarters. He'll be there Thursday for the bigger meeting. So that contact group instead chaired by Britain and Germany. They and the Ukrainians talking up missile defense initiatives and plans to share the leveling up of defense investment, European defense investment.
Our partners came to me and asked if Ukrainian companies could build factories for producing their cutting-edge products in their countries. And our partners said that they are willing to fully pay for all the production from these factories, and that our partners will even appropriate more funding for this.
Dave Keating, that sounds a little like the European answer to Donald Trump's rare minerals deal.
It does, because this would certainly bring benefits to Europe as well. It's not escaped anyone's notice that one of the big reasons why people put forward that Ukraine belongs in the European Union and Ukraine would be an excellent asset for the European Union as a member is because they have such a developed military sector, which not a lot of EU countries can claim. And this would be an example of Ukraine kind of moving its military resources over toward the EU, sharing those with the EU in a way that, a lot of people say if the US withdraws, Ukraine could go a long way in kind of keeping the balance while the core EU countries ramp up their military spending from very, very low levels that they've had in the past decades. So I think this is exactly what people are talking about who want to see greater integration of Ukraine and the European Union, particularly militarily. But this will not go down well with the likes of Viktor Orban in Hungary, Robert Fico in Slovakia, those who are skeptical of Ukraine's future in the European Union and also skeptical of the EU getting too involved in Ukraine's defense.
So, Dave, what about that empty chair? Officially, the reason given by the Pentagon is that Pete Hegseth had a scheduling conflict?
Yeah, I don't think that's very believable, is it? I mean, already in April, at the last meeting of the Ukraine Defense Contact Group, we were told that Pete Hegseth would not be attending. So that was actually supposed to be the first one where he wasn't there. However, at the last minute, he did join by video, virtually, from Washington. And so that was kind of, the can was kicked down the road. But I think everybody saw this coming, that the U.S. has been stepping away from this contact group, which the U.S. created started in 2022, immediately after Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Already, the US backed away from its leadership of the group, turning it over to the UK and Germany a few months ago. And now there's no defense minister there at all. Now, the head of the US mission to NATO was there, but he lives here. It's not really, this meeting is not intended for heads of mission. It's intended as defense ministers, and it has not gone unnoticed. It's seen as being an intentional signal to Europe that the US is just not going to be involved in militarily aiding Ukraine going forward. And if the Europeans want that to continue, they need to do it themselves.
They need to do it themselves. NATO allies in need of reassurance. We're 3 weeks out from NATO's annual summit this year in the Netherlands, in The Hague. The White House did confirm Tuesday that Donald Trump will be going. Question is, will he be going to read the Riot Act to allies? The nagging doubts linger. There we see one that was put to rest. America's next top general in Europe will also lead NATO forces. Some were wondering if that would still be the case. And we heard the NATO Secretary General this Wednesday absolutely denying that there's a drawdown in the works of the 80,000 plus U.S. forces permanently stationed on this continent.
There are no plans at the moment for the US to withdraw troops. What we do know is that, one, the US is completely committed to NATO. They expect European and Canadian allies to spend much more.
Reassured, Joachim Bitterlich, listening to Mark Rutte there?
No problem, if you want. I think headlines are a bit exaggerated. The Americans will, in my view, let's say, looking to 2 or 3 years ahead, reduce their troops in Europe. It will be clear. 80,000 for the moment. The Americans have other priorities, and they will reduce and ask the Europeans to take more responsibility with regard to their own zone. It's clear for me. This is the American priority, it's clear. This will not mean disengagement.
It won't mean disengagement, but what do you make of the absence of the U.S. Defense Secretary at that contact group meeting?
Priorities. Except, first goal has to prepare the summit on June 24th for Trump, it's clear. And therefore priorities to be set down and to be applied. And the Americans have decided some weeks ago to hand over the chairmanship of the contact group to the British and the Germans, and they stick to it. Europeans have to take more responsibility with regard to European problems.
Nothing. You agree with that, Claude Blanche-Maison? Yeah. It's nothing more than that. We're reading too much into this empty
I agree
chair?
with that. I mean, and I would just add that we are in a time of a certain uncertainty about what will be the exact attitude of Donald Trump, especially in this summit in The Hague. Then probably it was very uncomfortable. It would have been uncomfortable for the defense secretary to be sitting there today in this contact group of supporting Ukraine, because he doesn't know exactly what Trump will say in the summit in a few weeks' time. So probably it was better to let the seat for the U.S. ambassador. And anyway, the group is now co-chaired, as you said, by UK and by Germany, and therefore the Americans have handed this chairmanship to two European countries, meaning by that the European countries have to take the lead anyway in this Ukraine matter. But nobody knows exactly what will be the decision of Trump. You remember after his phone call of 1.5 hours or more than that with Putin, Trump said, "We'll see in a few weeks' time. I need 3 weeks' time, and you'll see." So we don't know exactly what he will decide as far as supporting Ukraine is concerned. We know only that he wants the Europeans to take a larger part, of course, in NATO and also in supporting Ukraine. Well, Ukraine is very far from the US. It's far away. And I think the American people don't know exactly where it is, by the way, and they don't know why to spend so much money for Ukraine. It's a matter for Europeans.
Mariana Boujarin, is that how Americans see it? And do you agree with Ambassador Blanche-Maison that if you're the U.S. Defense Secretary and you're not in Donald Trump's head, it's a losing game showing up at NATO and speaking on his behalf?
Well, it's hard for me to speak on behalf of all Americans, but there seems to be the Secretary Hegseth's non-appearance at this contact group seems to be consistent with the administration's general approach to the issue of Ukraine and trying to end the war in Ukraine, reach some kind of a ceasefire by playing not the part of unconditional support of Ukraine like his predecessor, but rather this neutral party that's trying not to aggravate President Putin, tries not to speak harshly of his aggression, right? We heard things like Ukraine is responsible for this war earlier on in this administration. So I think it's probably consistent with the overall approach to try and not lean too hard on either one of the sides to this conflict in order to still bring about some kind of peace settlement that Donald Trump clearly hopes very much for.
All right. And by the way, Donald Trump has been, meanwhile, speaking to Vladimir Putin this Wednesday. That's an interesting coincidence. So Pete Hegseth doesn't meet with his Ukrainian counterpart in Brussels, but Trump speaks with his Russian counterpart. What does that tell you, Mariana?
I think that the approach is that, these big issues get decided on the highest level. Trump has claimed that he has a good relationship with Putin, and he thinks he could leverage that to achieve some kind of progress in this ceasefire deal or peace settlement, whatever you want to call it. So far, we have not seen much progress through these means, right? We've had one phone call earlier that was followed with some devastating attacks against Ukraine, waves of missile and drone attacks. Putin did not show up to Istanbul talks, even though Ukraine's President Zelensky did. I think Trump still has the hopes that his high-level diplomacy, between the big boys, can get things sorted. It doesn't look optimistic, but perhaps he hasn't quit trying.
Joachim Birrich?
I can't agree more. It's clear. Please, the Russians have put their cards on the table with a memorandum as their, let's call it, minimum of, let's say, agreement at the end of the day. The Americans have not done so, nor the Europeans, clearly. And I think he is a bit waiting in order to get the right moment, let's say, to advance. And there will be a certain coordination with the Europeans with Trump in the next weeks, especially tomorrow's visit of Chancellor Merz to Washington. He will have other contacts to see exactly where he could go with Putin or where he could not go with Putin. He has to see this.
So you're saying Donald Trump's coming into the fold right now, and that he won't be. This won't be his goodbye tour when he shows up at that NATO summit.
No, I don't think so.
Dave Keating, what's the view where you are?
I mean, this sounds like a lot of wishful thinking to me. I think the view is that no one really knows what Donald Trump is going to do, but the expectation is that the Hague summit could really blow up if he decides to go there and make trouble. And that may indeed be the reason why Pete Hegseth didn't come today, although he will be coming here to Brussels tomorrow for the regular summit of defense ministers. But I'm not hearing a lot of optimism when you speak to people privately here that Donald Trump is seriously interested in peace, or that he's seriously interested in NATO, or that he's seriously interested in maintaining America's protection over Europe. There seem to be a lot of people who haven't really understood that message coming from Washington. It may be that Trump delivers it so bluntly in The Hague later this month that that message can no longer be ignored.
Claude Blanche-Maison, if you're Ukrainian right now, you're nervous, right?
Well, it's quite clear that Putin won't make any concession. He wants a kind of surrender of Ukraine and is winning time. So he doesn't want to break completely with Trump, so he continues to discuss with Trump because it's useful for him. But he will not make any concession because he's convinced that time is playing for himself, and it didn't change anything during the last 3 years on the real aims of this war. He wants a capitulation of Ukraine. He wants to having the annexation recognized by, if possible, the other countries, if not possible, recognized by the ceasefire agreement when there will be a ceasefire. He wants also demilitarization of the rest of Ukraine, and demilitarization of the rest of Ukraine, of course, is completely unacceptable for everybody. He wants also a sort of zone tampon, how would you say that?
A buffer zone.
A buffer zone. On the north, in the region of Kursk and Bryansk. And this buffer zone is not quite clear, but it's taken on the soil of Ukraine again, not both sides, but only on the side of Ukraine. And who will be keeping this buffer zone as a buffer zone? Nobody knows. I mean, he has said that it should be neutral people, neutral troops. So therefore, he doesn't agree that it could be American who would be keeping the ceasefire. So that's why probably there will be a third meeting between the Russians and the Ukrainians, probably in Istanbul. And there again, he's winning time, he's buying time, because time is, he thinks it's working.
It's on his side.
Yes.
So certainly a maximalist approach by the Russian president. The Ukrainians, well, they've been answering in kind in the past week. In fact, many of the questions at that press conference earlier of the British, German, and Ukrainian defense minister were about Operation Spiderweb, those sophisticated drone attacks that over the weekend they went as far away as the Arctic and Siberia, took out at least a dozen Russian planes, more than 40 according to Kyiv. That was bookended by last Saturday's sabotage of a rail bridge in Bryansk region and a third attack on the Kerch Strait bridge, the one that links Crimea to the Russian mainland. Antonia Kerrigan has more.
1,100 kilograms of explosives detonated on the seabed, hitting the load-bearing pillars of the Crimea bridge, says Kyiv. Essential for transporting supplies to Russian forces, the bridge has a dual-carriageway road and double-track railway. Measuring 19 kilometres from east to west, it was a flagship Russian infrastructure project, opened in 2018 to link Russia to Crimea after they annexed the peninsula 4 years earlier. Moscow said the bridge had only been closed for 3 hours, but it's a coup for Kyiv, just days after they launched a massive drone attack this weekend that destroyed dozens of Russian planes at air bases as far away as Siberia. But on Ukrainian soil, civilian casualties continue. Several were killed by rockets in the northeastern city of Sumy, and dozens more were injured.
A woman who was nearby suffered a severe abdominal injury. We dragged her into the pharmacy and did everything we could, but the injury was serious. I don't know what happened to her after that. Then the paramedics arrived. We helped load her into the vehicle and they took her to the hospital.
Sumy has been a key hub for organising Ukraine's months-long incursion into the Kursk region, and as such has been a frequent target of Russian strikes. President Zelensky said last week that Moscow was preparing to send tens of thousands of troops into the region. The cities of Odessa and Chernihiv were also targeted on Monday night, and the day after ceasefire negotiations in Istanbul, President Zelensky repeated his call for decisive action from Europe and the US to force Moscow into a ceasefire.
Yeah, and speaking of Sumy, Russia's army says it's captured another village in that region, the latest in a string of gains as Moscow seeks to establish what Ambassador Blanche Maison was referring to, that buffer zone inside of Ukrainian territory. There you see Sumy on the map. Mariana Bujarin, when you weigh up The Russian incremental gains, the time is on our side attitude versus those daring drone attacks so deep inside of Russian territory. Has it been a good week for which side?
Well, it's a war of attrition, right? It's hard to judge about the progress of this war, state of this war, just based on one weekend. Of course, what Ukrainians had showed is that, the rumors of Ukraine's imminent demise are certainly exaggerated. And generally, the whole narrative that Russia is winning and Ukraine is losing and somehow that Ukraine is doomed, that's not a narrative that's constructive or anywhere closer to the truth. Ukraine has agency and has determination. And even though it is generally a weaker party with lesser amount of resources, it's more creative. Right? What you hear in Ukraine is, yes, we're smaller, yes, we're weaker. That means we have to be smarter. And so the Sunday's attacks, drone attacks, have showed that Ukrainians are capable of being smarter and more inventive. Now, we don't know what else Ukrainians have up their sleeves in terms of long-term operations that are being planned. The incremental gains by the Russians are, of course, very painful, but they're also very painful for the Russians as well. They're losing a ton of people along the front line. And, with the support of the European partners, Ukraine is not a lost cause. With the sufficient support, Ukraine could certainly at least freeze this front line and stop Russian advances. That's what it seems from the Ukrainian standpoint.
Claude Blanche-Maison, as former ambassador to Russia, let me ask you, this is a vast country, right? It goes from the Baltic to the Pacific. It's huge. It's the largest country in the world by geographical size. These drone attacks, do they dent Russia's psyche? The idea that, well, because we're so big, we're invulnerable, right?
Well, my personal view is that Putin is really now obsessed by Ukraine. He was not so much obsessed when I was posted in Moscow in 2000 or 2003, 2004. But now it's really an obsession because he has rewritten the history and he pursued himself that it should be part of Russia. But I think this obsession is on Ukraine, and he wants Ukraine to surrender one way or another, but he has no view on other countries.
But ordinary Russians, what do they think of these drone attacks? I mean, near Murmansk, near the Norwegian border, for instance. What do they think about this?
Well, probably, of course, he's very worried about that because he didn't know that the Ukrainian was able to do that. And he didn't know also that they would dare to do that without the permission of the US, of course. And they did it. And more than that, they made a personal offense to Putin by attacking the bridge, the Kerch Bridge, because after all, this attack, the third attack on the Kerch Bridge, is not so much of military signification, but it's a personal attack against Putin because it's a personal thing, and it has been built by Mr. Rothenberg, an oligarch very close to him, and they have been making money together also. So this is really a slap on his face, and I think he has been hating Zelensky, and today is hating much more again Zelensky. He doesn't want to deal with Zelensky, who dared to do that.
You heard Mariana Bujarin saying, people wondering what else Ukraine can do.
Well, first of all, for me, it's the most interesting was the silence from Washington and from Moscow about these attacks. For me, it's not Pearl Harbor. It's totally exaggerated, but a serious damage, let's say, to the Russians and a serious violation of the Russian ego.
Yeah, because some of these planes are the ones that carry nuclear missiles.
Yes. And this is a serious attack, a serious damage too. And the Russians, were surprised. And they need a certain time to reflect what can we do now under these circumstances in order to hit more the Ukrainians. And they have difficulties to find it because when you look at, Claude, when you look at the northern front, there is not a real offensive of the Russians. There are small, let's say, steps forward. from one village to the next. That's all. It's not a real offensive.
There's been a troop buildup, though.
Yes, but with what aim, what are the real forces? We don't know enough about this. But the Russians see clearly the Ukrainians are defending themselves in a smarter way, yes, smarter than the Russians. The Russians have not really learned, let's say, in military strategy insofar. They follow their classical scheme up till now. The Ukrainians have to learn too, because, for example, I hear from specialists that the Ukrainians are not able to use the German Leopard tank as the Germans do it. They have real difficulties with these weapons, with certain weapons. But on the other hand, when I compare it to drones, the Ukrainians are far ahead from, let's say, from Western Europe, far ahead in so far. And therefore, it's extremely difficult, let's say, to see the right moment where you could bring about a ceasefire and, let's say, a peace settlement at the end of the day. I don't see it for the moment, frankly spoken. And what's on the table is, let's say, the Russian plan, largely accepted by Trump people weeks ago. And when I look back to the proposals I've written myself, 2019, after my last stay in Moscow, we are far away, let's say, from even such, let's say, a face-saving solution for the Ukraine. We are far away at the end of the day. But under what circumstances we could, let's say, reach a solution where the Ukrainians can tell, well, we have not lost the war. And the Russians at the same time can say, well, we have won the war. This is...
It's difficult, and at the same time, what we're seeing is perhaps more and more countries being drawn in.
Yes.
To keep up its offensive. Vladimir Putin again dispatching his national security chief to Pyongyang. Sergei Shoigu, welcomed by a North Korean strongman Kim Jong-un. North Korea, which has been supplying both soldiers and ammunition for Russia's war effort. That cannot be without China's blessing, said France's president last week. Emmanuel Macron in Singapore, addressing the big Shangri-La Dialogue Security Forum.
During the past few years, I had objected to NATO having any role in Asia, because for me, N is for North Atlantic. And because I don't believe in being enrolled in someone else's strategic rivalry. But what's happening with North Korea being present alongside with Russia on the European soil is a big question for all of us. And this is why, if China doesn't want NATO being involved in Southeast Asia or in Asia, they should prevent, clearly, DPRK to be engaged on the European soil.
Claude Blanche-Maison, that's a direct call to China, saying rein in North Korea. Were you surprised Emmanuel Macron made that statement?
I think the speech of President Macron in Shangri-La Dialogue is an important speech because, in fact, he meant that this war in Ukraine is now a globalized war. And the proof of it is that North Korea, a rogue state under very strong sanctions for the UN, is giving ammunition to Ukraine and all that, and probably without the blessing of China. I'm not sure that the trip of Shoigu in Pyongyang is very, very is pleasing Xi Jinping today, because by that, of course, Russia is attracting this rogue state, North Korea, in his zone area of influence, and it was normally meant that North Korea was under the protection of China, but they don't listen to Chinese advice at all. I mean,
So wait, are you telling me
because it's really a rogue
Are you telling
state.
me Emmanuel Macron is wrong then in telling China to rein in North Korea?
No, I think because I don't think China gave an agreement to what North Korea has been doing, because as you remember, China that was never recognized the annexation of Crimea. I mean, and China say we must respect the international order. Of course, we want the international order to be modified, but to be modified by the inside, by playing with the international order. We must respect the international law. And the integrity, the sovereignty of independent states. So they don't like what Putin has been doing. Of course, they won't say it publicly.
Yeah.
But they tell us
and
that
at
they
the
don't
same
like
time, and it's contradictory.
They don't
if
like
you
it,
want.
but Xi Jinping shows up at May 9th for the Victory Day
Yeah,
parade.
okay, but
Why not?
Okay, this is limited. This is limited to some extent. But at the same time, the Russians want to reinforce the relationship with North Korea in order to reduce their dependence on China. This is the political strategic goal behind.
In any case, there's either way, no hard feelings from Beijing over Macron's speech. Shares in European consortium Airbus up this Wednesday after Bloomberg News reported that Beijing's considering a huge purchase of up to 300 narrow and wide-bodied aircraft. Ukraine viewing the news suspiciously, particularly after the same Bloomberg News agency reported last week that Beijing had stopped selling Mavic drones to Ukraine. They're used for photography and to other Western countries, all the while continuing to supply them to Russia. Dave Keating, China in all of this, are they squarely sovereignists and or not? In the case of those drones, why say no to selling them to the Europeans and the Ukrainians, but yes to Russia?
I think because China has a big strategic interest in this war ending as quickly as possible, as does the Trump administration. And it was referenced before, Washington's silence in reaction to Ukraine's offensive of the past week. It's also been silence from China, because I think this really complicates things for those administrations in Washington and in Beijing who want this war ended by whatever means, that don't really care about whether Crimea is signed off over to Russia, whether Donbass is signed off over to Russia. Their main strategic goal is to end the war, and if it ends on Russia's terms, so be it. With Ukraine having this big show of strength, it actually complicates the Trump administration's goal of wrapping this up quickly, and for China, the same. So I think that's the reason why China would not want to support Ukraine, supply Ukraine with any type of equipment that will further prolong the war. It is in Washington and Beijing's interest for Ukraine to be weak, for Ukraine to not have the cards, as Trump insisted, because in their view, that makes the war end quicker.
Marianne Boudjourin, what was your reaction when you heard that clip of France's president?
I think Macron put the Chinese on the spot. I mean, I agree that they don't, North Koreans are not their puppet regime, but I think it was the kind of message that you have to exert influence. If we're talking about spheres of influence, this is your chance, right, to make a statement. And I don't think the news about the Mavic FPV drones is really that drastic. I mean, yes, China perhaps had to show a stance or some kind of response to this drone attack, but surely Ukraine could procure these drones through third parties. It would be a little bit more complicated, but it does not mean that Ukraine's kind of supply of drones will quickly dry up. So I view these more as political moves and political reactions and statements than anything that will have a tangible effect on the battlefield. Although I do agree that possibly the prospects of a peace settlement are dim, but I think they were dim before these drone attacks anyways. So nothing much will change in that sphere.
Nothing much will change. What we have seen, though, is this push to level up. And we saw it again this Wednesday as the German Chancellor, Friedrich Merz, travels to Washington as Defense Minister Boris Pistorius, announcing that Germany would kick off a new initiative to find more air defenses for Ukraine. We may see Friedrich Merz offered to buy Patriot missiles from the Americans. We saw talk as well of perhaps trying to manufacture more here in Europe. But certainly something is in the works when it comes to trying to pick up the slack if Donald Trump decides he no longer wants to finance military support for Ukraine.
No, you have a double goal at the same time. On the one hand, how to maintain the support to Ukraine by military means, and at the same time, how to get the arms, let's say, rapidly in, the necessary arms. And the first and utmost is air defense for the Ukrainians, it's clear. With drones, it works rather well, even better than others. But the real subject is air defense, and the Ukrainians will have, at the same time, to learn to use these modern Western European or American weapons. And therefore, to find, let's say, this right mixture. And I add to this another subject to Mertz's visit to Washington. What could be the right, let's say, means to get Putin seriously at the table of negotiations? Because up to now it's not serious. These are secondary subjects.
And could Friedrich Merz be the man to do that?
Well, the question is, I put the simple question. Up to now we have done so many sanctions, 17 packages of sanctions. Result? Well, I have doubts about these sanctions. I've been dealing in Brussels all the sanction cases in my Brussels past. The success story has been only one, South Africa. The whole rest never worked. But did we take the right sanctions or the right means to get the Russians on the table, let's say, to get at least a, let's say, suitable agreement for both sides, defendable. What's not defendable will be Ukraine in NATO, it's clear for me. A neutral status, yes, but not a dependent status on Russia. What to do with the eastern provinces in Ukraine. Crimea, for me, is away. If you want, I don't see any step back. But at least to get something where the Ukrainians could live with. And I'm looking for what could be the right means, let's say, to tell Putin, now you can stop it, please, and leave the Ukrainians in peace and what they would like to do.
And for that, Dave Keating, you'll need to convince Donald Trump. Are people where you are betting on the new Chancellor of Germany?
There's certainly going to be a lot of eyes on that meeting tomorrow. I think particularly because Merz has been more outspoken than most in terms of Europe needing to, as he put it, become independent of the United States. So the big question is he going to be a little more prickly in that meeting with Donald Trump than Emmanuel Macron and Keir Starmer were in their very chummy meetings with Donald Trump? If he does choose to go in that route, it could not go very well. Of course, he doesn't have a previous relationship with Donald Trump. We don't know how Donald Trump has reacted to some of the comments Merz has made. We're not really sure if he's aware of them, but he could be made aware of them before this meeting, and things could really go south. I'm not hearing much hope that Merz is going to be able to smooth talk Trump into coming on side here in supporting Europe and supporting Ukraine. There's not the same type of hope I heard with Macron, when some people call him the Trump whisperer, or that Starmer could charm him. I'm not hearing any kind of hope for that. What I am hearing is fears that it could go very wrong. At the same time, though, I'm hearing from a lot of people they would like to see somebody in that Oval Office stand up for Europe, stand up to Trump in a way that no European leader has been willing to do so far.
So it's always a bit of political theater, Mariana Bujarin. When you go to the Oval Office these days, you heard Dave Keating reference the visits by Emmanuel Macron and Keir Starmer. We saw Mark Carney, we saw most recently Cyril Ramaphosa, and of course we saw Volodymyr Zelensky. Surely the German Chancellor has a strategy. What would you be saying if you were whispering, not in Trump's ear, but in Friedrich Merz's ear at this point? I
would probably tell Merz that to forsake hope to influence Trump and just announce to him or make him aware of Europe's plan and strategic interest and providing for its own security, and then hoping that Trump will see Europe as a strong and self-sufficient partner. Yes. I really don't think any kind of whispering in Trump's ear, flattery or any other strategies that have been tried would be successful. He's a very unpredictable man, and you can't base your own security on these kinds of mood swings.
Claude Blanche-Maison?
Well, of course, I don't know, but I'm quite convinced that Chancellor Merz will say some nice words to Donald Trump.
In English?
In English, of course, and saying that he made a lot of progress since he has taken over in the White House. But still, he will also say that this situation in Ukraine is very dangerous, and if Ukraine was going to lose, after all, it would be also a victory for Putin and something very serious for the United States themselves, not only for Western Europe, but also for Mr. Trump. Or Mr. Trump is a winner, not a loser. So he will probably play that kind of argument. Whether it will work or not, I don't know. But we have seen Trump moving a little bit on having some doubts about Putin, saying that, well, he's a real difficult guy. But at each time he was saying that Zelensky was also a difficult guy. So probably Chancellor Merz, after Macron and after the Prime Minister of UK, will say it's not possible that you become a loser. Of course, Trump cannot be a loser. So you have to come with us. And you have to stay with us on the Ukraine issue.
So if you're the
This regards four subjects. The first one with Trump, between Merz and Trump, will be commerce trade between the US and Europe is an important subject. Let's say the aim, to come to a solution or to an agreement before the summer. The second one will be, please, dear American, take your interests. Realpolitik is interest policy. Accept a larger role of the Europeans within NATO. You will stay there. We will take over more responsibility. The third one is Ukraine, how to, balance it. And the fourth one, let's not forget it, is China, please. Because the Americans have deep interest in, seeing the Europeans not too far away from them with regard to China. Because the next real task of Trump will be to get an agreement with Xi on the trade subject. It's clear. And therefore, I think Merz will be ready, to talk to Trump on pure, what I call, interest-based goals. Because he understands the American interests insofar. He sees the European interests, and I think Trump will listen to him more than we have been thinking, in the first weeks of his new American administration with the strange attacks of Vance and others. It will be another tone, another style.
We shall see in any case. I want to thank you so much, Joachim Birlich, for being with us. Claude Blanche-Maison, Mariana Bujarin in Cambridge, Massachusetts, Dave Keating in Brussels. Thank you for being with us here in the France 24 debate.